And he taught me something that's been with me now for 30 something plus years, probably 37 years. And that is this: how much money you make is not as important as how much money you keep. And you're the only one responsible for how much you keep. Not your CPA, not your spouse, not your parents, not your attorney. It's your responsibility and solely your responsibility. I'm going to pay $71 this year. That's it. If I follow the traditional way of doing business and not understanding corporate structures, the way that corporate America and the way billionaires use the law, because I don't do anything in loopholes, it's all about the law, I'd be paying over $1 million a year in taxes.
G'day, Dr. Tony here with another episode of Realms of Power. And today I've got the amazing Rondi Lambeth from the United States, who is a guru in the realm of finances, helping people with, amazing sort of awareness around the whole financial industry and how we can stand in our power there. So Rondi, welcome to the show.
It is good to be alive today. And I can tell you this, Tony, it is good to be back to America. I just spent the last 8 days in Guatemala. And the best part, I was down there teaching some entrepreneurs how to legally protect their assets and reduce their taxes. And I can tell you this, that the best part of traveling is coming home, especially when you go outside of the country.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great. So for our listeners, mate, it'd be great for you to just give just a brief summary, I guess, of your area of expertise in this realm. Like, where did it come from? Why you're so passionate about helping people in this realm? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I grew up, unlike a lot of people in America, I grew up really poor, as in no running water, no electricity, in a shack, about an hour outside of Boise, Idaho. Idaho's on the West Coast. It's a flyover state, so people have heard of it, but they've never really been there. And it's an amazing state. And I grew up really poor. If we didn't catch it or shoot it, we didn't eat it. And we got our food out of a dumpster. And I didn't get to go to school much as a kid. My parents believed that the Russians were going to invade the United States at any time. It'd be nuclear holocaust. And so we spent half the year living in the mountains in a tent, the other half of the year running from the government because my parents didn't let me go to school. And I'm the oldest of 13 kids. And my stepdad, who, raised us, was a convicted murderer. And he was multiple personalities. And some days he was nice, and a split second later, he was busting you over the head with a 12 gauge shotgun or, kicking you or whatever. So at 15 years old, I just got tired of the abuse, the neglect, and eating out of a dumpster. And I knew what my parents taught me about money wasn't real. I knew they were wrong. See, I got taught what most people get taught, that money's the root of all evil, that rich people are bad, that money doesn't grow on trees. And I learned that when I would go to school, the teachers would occasionally let some parents take me to their house where I could take a bath, and they'd wash my clothes and they'd feed me. And I learned that rich people were not bad. And rich in air quotes, they had electricity. They were going back now, they're just middle class, just living paycheck to paycheck, barely making it. But in my mind, they were rich. And so at 15, I left home and I bounced around in social services and welfare and foster care. And eventually at 16, I met a guy in Oregon named Wally Williams, and he ran multiple different companies, very successful, one of the richest men in this county. And one of the businesses he had was a funeral home. And he hired me to wash the cars, vacuum the cars, as a detailer, to mow the lawn at his house and his office, the funeral home, and do errands. And then eventually the assistant funeral director quit. And somewhere around my 16 and a half years old, he asked me if I wanted to be a funeral director. And he was going to put me on salary for $1,000 a month, which was a lot of money because minimum wage was $3 an hour. I got a company car, I got clothes. And that's when my real education of finances came in. And he taught me something that's been with me now for 30 something plus years, probably 37 years. And that is this: how much money you make is not as important as how much money you keep. And you're the only one responsible for how much you keep. Not your CPA, not your spouse, not your parents, not your attorney. It's your responsibility and solely your responsibility. And now, 20 plus years of being in this space, working with some of the biggest athletes and celebrities on the planet, I can tell you that most people, they make a lot of money, but they also spend a lot of money. They're not much better off than your W-2'd or paycheck to paycheck school teacher or firefighter. They're most of your influencers on social media. As a guy that for the last 19 years has fixed their credit through one of my other companies, most people are struggling. And you can be financially free at $50,000 a year. I have a friend that makes over $5 million a year. He owns no real estate. He leases all of his cars. He has no retirement accounts. And for all intents and purposes, he's broke at $5 million a year because he spends more than really what he keeps. So that's a little bit about my background. And I love what I do. I get to help people maximize their credit, minimize their debt, mitigate their taxes, multiply and protect assets. And it's very, very rewarding for me. So thanks for letting me share that with other folks.
Well, look, that's a beautiful story, as in painful and bad for you to grow up, but it gave you the scale and finding that mentor or those people that gave you that opportunity. But really, the opportunity there for you, what I hear is the education about the principles and being able to stick to that. And that's where I think when people don't stand in their power, I think the system and the family structure and upbringing, all those things you said about money doesn't grow on trees, all that sort of stuff, is so imbued in people's cellular memory, and they just don't have either the skills or that financial education. Why do you think that is in terms of, in different countries, even that principle around money is being taught to the majority of people, whether they're earning a lot of money or not? Why do you think that underlying block is there for so many people?
I think if I had to put my finger on it, I think it's because people don't want to take personal responsibility and they want to rely on the government to take care of them or their parents to take care of them. I heard once that there's an expiration date of blaming your parents for your problems, you know, and that expiration date is basically when you can drive a car and take your life into your own hands. And I think, I hear this on a very regular basis. And it's either my parents didn't teach me about money, therefore I don't know anything, or our demographic doesn't teach about money. So whether it's, as a Black American, we don't learn about money, or as a Mexican American, or it's all the same. And that's what I tell them. I'm like, it's not just because you're Black that you didn't learn about money and credit and finances or taxes. No one does. Like, the only way you can learn this is if you go out and teach it yourself. And some of it is the lack of responsibility. The second part of it is programming. See, we're taught from a very young age, go to school, get good grades so you can get a good job and you can retire. Prior to the 1900s, that didn't exist in the United States. It was, or anywhere in the world. It used to be families built dynasties together. And it was a family business and a family company. And they built these dynasty companies. And then the Rockefellers, the JP Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the industrialists needed employees. And it's said that Rockefeller went to what was Russia and asked them, like, how do you train people to work in the factories and not be entrepreneurs and not build family companies and family structures? And the answer was really simple. We start when they're really young and we convince them to go to school, and we teach them not to think, but we teach them to memorize and to repeat. And so after the turn of the century, people really started, instead of being a family company, it started to be individually what you can do individually to make your money and build your empire. And what then it's like, well, I'm going to give what I can to my kids. But if you go back through history and you study the wealthy families, It goes from wealthy to poor again in 3 generations. It's very rare that it makes past 3. And a good case in point is the Vanderbilts. You know, the Vanderbilts during the time when John D. Rockefeller was alive was very wealthy. And within 3 generations, they were broke. And there's really no money left in the Vanderbilt family. Where the Rockefellers, they still have billions and billions of dollars now, 7 generations later. So I think part of it, Todd or Tony, is I think it's the government programming it because, you know, at least here in America, it's W-2 employees. They're the ones that pay the majority of the income tax collected. You know, and there's a thing here in America where they're saying the rich don't pay taxes or the rich don't pay their fair share. That's simply not true. It's a thing that the politicians like to campaign on because the public doesn't understand it. Now, do the rich pay a lot in income taxes? No, they don't. They don't pay a lot in income taxes because they don't make a lot of income. They have assets and they understand how to leverage debt and how to use debt to eliminate their income taxes. And they understand how taxes, and many of the wealthy they don't know how it works. They just hire someone like me that knows how it works, or, you know, another professional like me to do that for them. But the reason the wealthy don't pay their fair share of taxes, they just don't make a lot of income. You know, I'll tell you, I just finalized my taxes for last year. I'm going to pay $71 this year. That's it. And it should be in the if I followed traditional CPA rules, if I followed the traditional way of doing business and not understanding corporate structures, the way that corporate America and the way billionaires use the law, because I don't do anything in loopholes. It's all about the law. I'd be paying over $1 million a year in taxes. Instead, I'm going to write a check this year for $71. And so to long answer that question, the short answer is most people don't know about money because they're too lazy and they're ignorant. Not stupid. Ignorant as in they just don't know what they don't know and they don't take the time. They'd rather watch the Super Bowl and root for their favorite team than spend an extra 15 minutes a day studying how do I reduce my taxes.
You know, I love that personal responsibility thing. And you'd have to admit that you would, I'm sure, see in the financial industry, most people do want more money, as you say. And there are a lot of financial advisors and accountants, of course, as well, that actually just really give that bad advice. That they aren't on your team or they are following the rules of the game. And there are some people, like it's very hard for the average person who's not an expert in that area to sort of, you know, they might have trusted someone and that person has let them down. So it's finding that right advice as well, like you've just said, which is so critical, I think, for the right path. And some people go well, and as you say, they can lose it all pretty quick. And
Mhm.
if they're doing the wrong thing. So how important and how do you know in yourself to find that right advice or that right path to create that financial freedom that most people would really love?
You know, I think one of the things that you should do if you're considering hiring a tax advisor is to really understand how the game of money works. See, there's offense and there's defense. And what most people focus on is just the opposite, the offense, making money. And they don't pay attention to the defense of it. And just like with any game, whether it's football or rugby or soccer, if all you do is play offense, you're going to lose. You got to do some offense and defense. And then the third part of it is the playing field, the rules. Most people think their CPA, their certified public accountant, that's the person to go to beat the opponent. But that person's there to follow the rules, to make sure you follow the rules, to make sure your taxes are filed on time, to make sure the forms are filled out properly. You don't call a timeout and run to the referee and ask the referee, how do I beat this opponent? Now, the referee knows the rules better than anybody else. That's their job. They are the specialists at the rules, but they don't know how to create plays. It's not their position to help you beat the IRS, the opponent. Their position is to make sure you follow the rules. So I come in as an advisor and I want to beat the opponent. And I know that I got to follow the rules. So we use the referee to help us along the way, but I'm the one creating the strategies and the plays to make sure we win. And so that's first thing, is understanding the game of money, the offense, defense, and then the rules of the game. And the second thing is, we're taught as a young age, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, and don't talk about money. Well, if you don't talk about money with your friends and family and other people, how are you supposed to learn about it? And I think that's done on purpose. I think they created that, for one, so people don't feel bad of their own laziness and their own inadequacies to get better. Because if you talk about money and they find out you make more money than them because you learn more and you're doing more, it tends to make people feel bad. And so we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I think with that, they don't ask their advisor about money questions. Like, one of the things I'm happy to show anybody who hires me, I'm happy to show them my tax returns and show them specifically how I make millions of dollars a year and I pay $71 in tax. I'm happy to show that. I have a credit repair company where I've helped over 100,000 people restore their credit. I'm happy to show them my credit report and show them I have extremely good credit, that I use my credit. And so I think one of the things you can do with your advisor is ask to see their taxes, ask to see their personal finances. And most people won't show it, and most people won't ask because they're embarrassed. But I have no problem asking it, especially with a financial advisor. When someone comes to me, and I had one this morning text me, asking me to start referring business to them, and I'll have no problem saying, well, let me see your portfolio. Let me see how you make money, because I want to see how you're making money before I go and invest in you. Because if you're making all of your money as a financial advisor on commissions from selling me products, I don't want to use you as a financial advisor. You're just a salesperson. This morning, I received a message on Instagram. I had a big podcast I was on it a few months ago, but it aired today. And it's in the top 10 in the nation. And so someone responded to me and they're like, hey, I saw your podcast and I know I could help you grow your social media. Well, one, I didn't ask for your help. So you're already in the bad side of me doing business with you. And two, I went to their page and I have almost a million followers across all of the platforms. But on Instagram, this platform, I have like almost 200,000 followers. And this person who reached out to me to build my brand and help me get more exposure had less than 2,000 followers. Now, why would I hire someone with 2,000 followers to help me get over 200,000? But most people do this with their finances. Most people will go to the CPA that's barely making it, or go to the financial advisor that makes their money from commissions, not investing. So the short answer to your question, sometimes I give long answers, is ask them to show their personal finances with you. And if they're unwilling to show it, don't do business with them.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And so for the average person who's trying to get ahead, and you're talking about paying the $71 tax, how important is setting up your structures, like you were talking before about company structures or trust structures, to hold those assets? And they might be starting from they're actually in too much debt, or they might have a home, or they might just be renting, whatever the situation. Is it setting up the structures first that you found is one of the best pathways to, minimize tax, if you like?
Yeah, the structure is, when you first start up your business, you generally will do some type of LLC, limited liability company, or a corporation. And really people do that for asset protection. But what they don't realize, at least in the States, I assume Australia is probably the same. If you don't do the paperwork right, the courts it's a disregarded entity. You don't get any asset protection if the paperwork's not properly done. And so most people will start it. They'll set up their companies on their own, or maybe they use their CPA to do it. Again, back to the referee, not the coach. And then they get busy trying to make money, and they don't really spend a lot of money making sure the structure's done properly. And then once you start making money, now you got bills, employees, and now you're in this rat race, and you're constantly trying to make more money to stay afloat. And so you kind of forget about your structure. But structure is, I think, the most important thing you can do, because structure does asset protection. So when I set up a structure, number one is for asset protection. So if someone ever sued you, they can't take anything from you because you don't own anything. If you don't own it, there's nothing to take. So first is asset protection. Number two is legacy preservation. Again, prior to the 1900s, we worked together as a family, and we were in the family business, and we would inherit the business and continue that business. And now everybody's on their own. And so they try to do it. So we want to do estate planning and legacy preservation. So we have asset protection and then legacy preservation for your future generations. And then third is tax reduction. I do a lot of traveling and a lot of speaking in a lot of events. And a very popular topic of events for business owners is how to make more money, how to streamline, how to scale, how to use AI so you can be more efficient and make more money. But very few people focus on the one thing that can make a difference, and that is reducing your taxes. Because if you're taxed at 40%, or if you live in California, it's 68% tax if you make over $1 million. So if you make $1 million in California, you're going to pay $600,000 in taxes. Well, if you want to grow your business, the easiest way to be more profitable is eliminate that $600,000 in taxes. And that's like growing your business by 2-3 times with the same amount of customers. So instead of trying to figure out how can I make more money, how about we figure out how to protect the assets and eliminate the tax so we can actually live a life by design and not by default, and just be working ourselves to death all the time.
It's just so key for so many people. And again, some people might listen to this show and you've got a huge amount of followers, and they sort of learn from you and they go, oh, I'm inspired to do that. And then they feel like they just get pulled back into the rat race. They might even sort of see that glimmer, and then they just drop back down because they're not doing the first thing you said, which was take that personal responsibility, stand into their power and go, enough is enough. I have to make that shift. How have you seen people can make that shift? Like, besides just being inspired by you, and you're very calm and you're very just centered and grounded because you've been doing this a long time, how do people that might be in the rat race take that responsibility and stand into their power?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just identifying them. But this is what I'm going to do. And you don't have to, you don't need to know how you're going to do things. In fact, I was really reflecting last night on, business in general, and kind of like what you're talking about. And it's interesting that you brought this up, because it was really what I was thinking about last night, of a title for a book, which is What Not How, and what you want in life, not how are you going to get it. I got challenged by my personal trainer a month ago to write down 100 things that I want in life and 100 experiences that I want to experience. And I got to tell you, I'm now 5 weeks into this, and I'm at 60 items total of the 200. And you might not think this is that hard to write down 100 things that you want, but it's extremely difficult. And the reason that he has me writing down 100 things that I want is we have what he calls a mind virus. And that is that we think that something equals something else. We always have an equal sign. So money equals happiness, or more money equals more problems. Or as an entrepreneur, I'll be happy when I do this. But as soon as I get close to the goalpost, I move it another 100 yards. And we constantly move it. So we're always chasing and we never sit back and actually enjoy what we accomplished. We're always going for more. And that's part of this brain virus. And the other part of the mind virus is I don't really need it. And so when you go and you're starting to write down the 100 things that you want, you're going to find yourself saying, well, I want this, but I don't really need another car. I don't need another Rolex. I don't really need, another house. So we start talking ourselves out of what we really want. And so you need to figure out what you want versus how you're going to get it. And once you figure out what it is that you want in life and design your life. See, 2 years ago, November 2023, started out as every other day on a Saturday. It was 2 days after Thanksgiving. And I live in Idaho and it's, November, it's usually winter time here and it's snowing and cold. And it was a warm 65-degree day. And I went and had breakfast with my girlfriend. I went on a walk next to the river. Gorgeous day, no stress. I got home. I was thirsty from being out in the sun. I took a drink of water. And a split second later, it felt like someone was ripping my arms off and crushing my throat. And I collapsed on the floor. I got up, I crawled over to the couch and I got up on the couch and I sat there for a minute. And I spent 15 years on a medevac helicopter in the military. And I spent 11 years as a medic, as a fireman. And I realized something was wrong. Like this was not indigestion, but I didn't have any symptoms of a heart attack. I didn't have any nausea. I didn't have any chest pain. It just felt like someone was ripping my arms off, like in the scene in Braveheart when they pull Mel Gibson's arms out of his sockets. And so I immediately went to the hospital. And within 30 minutes, I was getting heart surgery. And I had 3 arteries in my heart spontaneously rupture. And I was bleeding out. And because I was bleeding out and those arteries were ruptured, they started to clot. And then I ended up having a heart attack. And so they had put stents in my heart. And I took a year off and I didn't work. And I just sat on my back porch watching the ducks and the geese and the chickens and the animals and just figured out what is it in life that I actually want to do? Like if I can't work, what is it that I'm going to do? And so I got to do that for a year. And very few people actually ever sit down for more than even a minute and come up with what it is that you want in life. So to answer your question, I would say if you're watching this and you're inspired by it and you're interested and you want to make a change in your life, you first got to figure out what it is you want. Like, I'm not saying if you're a school teacher that you can just quit your job and go do something else. If you have a family, you got to still maintain your responsibilities, but figure out your life, what it would be like. Because if you can figure out what you want, then we can figure out how to get it later. That's the easy part. The universe will come in. God will come in and get the how if you figure out what you want, because you can't get to the how if you don't know what you want in the first place. So that would be the first step. And then from there, almost everything I've learned, because I didn't get to go to school much. And everything I've learned is through books and seminars and podcasts and people. And that's why I try to spend so much time on social media for other people. In fact, the other night, I was watching a series and it was on a gentleman who created the TV. He was a potato farmer in Rigby, Idaho, that never went to school. He had no education whatsoever. And he lived about 200 miles away from where I live now in Idaho. And he invented the TV. And the way he came up with the lights for the TV and the idea of tubes was he was plowing the fields with a horse. And as he turned around to go plow another row of potatoes, he looked at the lines of the potato field and he saw as the sun went over the pasture, how it changed the colors. And that's where he came up with the idea to create a monitor, a TV, and a camera is through a potato field. And then he went and hired all of his he hired his cousins and brothers and mom and dad. And then RCA, one of the most powerful companies in the world at the time, tried to copy it and they couldn't figure it out with the top scientists. So they went in and they stole it from him. And that's why no one's ever heard of Barnsworth's name, is because RCA stole his invention for the TV. And that's why they're accredited to creating the TV, but really wasn't RCA. My point to all of that is he was self-educated. He didn't go to school. He could barely read and write, but he taught himself how to do it. And then he taught himself science. So we need to take personal responsibility and know that every single thing taught at universities today, everything is on YouTube, all of it. My daughter's a trauma nurse in Las Vegas, Nevada. During COVID, she was in nursing school and she was not learning very well on Zoom. So most of what she learned and becoming a trauma nurse and graduating with honors was from YouTube. So there is no excuse for anyone really in the world to not be educated anymore because it's all available. You just got to go out and find it.
Yeah, I sort of agree on some level the way the education system's going, certainly here in Australia, and I'm sure over there as well. The indoctrination that happens there is almost like a disadvantage because you're not going to school means you're just got this, you don't have that. So you've just got this mind that's probably more open and able to absorb. And like you said before as well with your heart, we only have a certain amount of heartbeats. So the people that are procrastinating and avoiding the problem and putting it off with the limited heartbeats, the time is now. Like go and learn the stuff. Go and find what you want. Do the stuff you love doing that lights you up. Because if you're doing stuff that you don't love doing, oh geez, that's boring with the amount of heartbeats you got. So just get lit up and do the stuff you love. Mate, look, I absolutely love that. And I've loved your share today. Just beautiful, calm wisdom. And if one person watches this and the ripple effect of that is their life is turned on, it's been a great conversation for that. Ronnie, is there anything you'd like to finish with? Some final bit of wisdom you might have for our listeners that could turn their power on, I guess, especially in this financial realm?
Yeah, if you're a business owner in Australia, I have many clients from Australia and they're reaching out to me because Australia has a problem right now. And, I've never been to Australia. I will probably be there next year at a speaking event, but I've never been. So I'm not going to say I'm an expert on your tax law there, but I do know how to set up corporate structures and pull money out of Australia so you can not pay taxes on it. But what I'm told from my clients who live in Australia, that Australia has a pretty substantial money problem. And so they are taxing business owners to death. And it's really difficult for entrepreneurs in Australia to be profitable because of the amount of tax. And so a lot of these clients are reaching out to me and I'm setting up Wyoming companies, LLCs and corporations. So they're legally allowed to pull money out of Australia, send it to a US based bank account. It is a deduction in Australia, which means you don't have to pay taxes on it. And then they have leverage and they can access that money through loans and credit cards and other things and in other investments. And they can buy other businesses with it. So look at the structure and realize that there are ways to legally and permanently, ethically and morally reduce your taxes. At least here in America, we were founded by entrepreneurs. And a lot of people don't know this. They left tyranny. They wanted freedom of religion. They wanted freedom of speech, which Australia and Europe, they no longer have that. Because if you say the wrong thing on Instagram, they throw you in jail or on TikTok or on Twitter. Um, and it started to get that way in America. And now it's turned around with the new administration. We're getting our right to free speech back. We're not getting thrown in jail for saying things or spending time with our families when they say we can't because of COVID. And so I would recommend to go out and actually do a little bit of research because there are things that you can do, but America was founded by entrepreneurs that didn't want to pay taxes. And so the most patriotic thing that you can do as an American or as an Australian for your country is to reduce your taxes. Because if the politicians have less money to waste, they have less power to control our lives. And the only way we could take away their power is to take away their money. And the only way we can take away their money is to legally pay less taxes. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is you either hire someone like me or you figure it out and you learn. And it's not that difficult. It really isn't that complicated.
Beautiful wisdom. So you've got your website up on the thing there. How would people in Australia that are in a position to resonate with what you're saying reach out to you? Is it going on your website, Facebook? How would they find you, Rondi?
They can find me on all social media platforms at Rondi Lambeth, or they can find me at rondilambeth.com. That's probably the safest place. And I say safest because when you start creating as much content as I do, there are scammers that duplicate me. And there are many profiles on social media that's the same name as mine, just a little different variation. So if you do reach out to me on social media, make sure it's got the blue check mark. And also know that if you reach out to a Rondi Lambeth and you accidentally reach out to the wrong one, I will never ask you to send any money or buy any Bitcoin or buy any courses. So if you accidentally reach out on social and it's like, click this link to buy some money or Bitcoin, that's not me. It's the wrong profile. So make sure it's got the blue check mark, or just to be safe, go to rondilambeth.com and schedule a consultation with me.
All right, that's amazing, mate. Look, it's been an absolute honor. I feel really privileged having you on the show, and whether that's accessing some different unique people of our audience or whoever this ends up going to, the way you are educating people in the world to stand into their power legally, morally, ethically, I take my hat off to you, mate. I think you're doing amazing work.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, mate, I really appreciate it. And for the listeners tuning in, you guys have an awesome day. See ya.